and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
I'm doing very good, Keith. How are you today?
I am doing good. And just want people to know this is not a disaster area here. This is my new t-shirt from the 7-day shootout, which was a part of our Knoxville Film Festival this year. And this was a design I had because it's a special pandemic edition t-shirt. And our theme this year was "Don't Panic." So that's what this shirt is about. Ray, why don't you introduce our guest to us today?
Yes, I'll be glad to. I like that shirt, by the way, and you did a good job with your festival, having to struggle around the pandemic. I've watched you do that online, and I applaud you because a lot of people have had to do a lot of strange things to keep their activities going this
That
year.
is exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, we've got Don Bell with us today. Don is a longtime Oak Ridger, and I admire his ability to remember things about growing up in the city of Oak Ridge. And Don, that's what we want to focus on today. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fine. Went to the ball game last night, the Oak Ridge game, which been going ever since. I'm a native Oak Ridger, born here in 1955, and my dad got transferred to laid off at K-25 in 1961. We moved to Ellsworth Air Force Base, and my dad worked on the Titan missile project. And the next year, he got transferred to Beale Air Force Base in Chico, California. So I spent 2 years away from Oak Ridge and came back and was raised up off of Michigan Avenue. Started. So then went to the New Jefferson as it opened. We called it the New Jefferson. It opened in '68, and graduated Oak Ridge in '74. I had two brothers. One graduated in '67. He is deceased right now. And then I have another brother that graduated in '69 from Oak Ridge. So the Jackson Square area of Oak Ridge was, I could say, my stomping grounds. That's where I learned and asked very inquisitive young boy. I talk about riding my bicycle down Michigan Avenue and going into the old library across from the Alexander, which is now changed over to assisted living. But I just have such fond memories of Jackson Square and pulling my bike in there and going in and get me a cold Coca-Cola out of the machines down there and riding through and seeing Mr. Horn at On Samuels and Mr. McMahon that had the Jackson Square Pharmacy there. And then I'd ride around, see Charlie Jackson over there at Jackson Hardware. He ran it. And go on down, and you can go on down and see Jerry Story, that was later on the assistant manager at the Value Mart, which later on changed to Watson's. And going into the B&R Variety Store and getting me a nickel bag of popcorn instead of paying a dime at the Ridge. And my special place of all was where Big Ed's is, Service Drug Store, where Jesse would fix me a bowl of special chili and a grilled cheese sandwich and a cherry smash. But it was more than that. It has been described to me by other people as a utopia growing up in Oak Ridge. I don't think that anybody that ever grew up as a little kid here could ever find, Ray, a better place to grow up in. It had so many advantages, and I took it all in, and I would ask questions. I would ask older people, what did that used to be, and what was that? And I could say in school, I wasn't an excellent student. I was a struggling student in my early years, but later on, I had a special teacher that really helped me, and had a lot of special teachers. But just to sum it up in that respect, Ray, I just took it all in. I love my city of Oak Ridge and have never left. It's just a wonderful place to live.
I appreciate you saying that, and I agree with you. A lot of people who grew up here describe it in that utopian kind of way that you did. I want to take us off on a slightly sidetrack for just a second, and then I want to come back to your experiences. We've had over the last couple of weeks, we've had some conversations with folks about Oak Ridge area, and I had the opportunity of working with John Jefferson on a book, The Bones of Betrayal, him and Dr. Bass. And in that book, they included a part of the story was about Jackson Square. Of course, it started out at the Alexander Inn's, what they called it at the time, with a murder there. But John wanted to explore the drainage system, the storm drains coming out of Jackson Square. And he walked down inside those storm drains and came out down near the library. He said that he had been told that people actually rode their bicycles down there. So my question to you is, did you ever go underground up at Jackson Square?
Ray, I can't say I did, but Howie Irwin, my principal, he is passed at Glenwood. I worked at Glenwood Elementary School. He had gone in somewhere up above Blankenship Field, where the old Blankenship Field practice track is. And he said they used to go and come out at the old, somewhere near the old steam plant down there where the the Oldsmobile, used to be an Oldsmobile dealership, or Sexton, I think, has that now down there, but they used to be a steam plant down there, you know.
Right, that'd be right down on, go under the turnpike and come up.
It did.
Over.
It went down, sure did.
Mm-hmm. So there's a little something to the story that there's a big storm drain up there around Jackson Square. That often really comes up. I won't waste any more time on that other than just to mention it as one of the hidden history facts about Oak Ridge. And I often get asked about things being underground. I mean, they think Y12 must have something underground out there. Well, they've got some basements, but they don't have anything really underground. There is one that was it still is underground, that you may have heard about, Katie's Kitchen, which is over on the south side of Chestnut Ridge. And they did dig a hole back in the ridge to store the highly enriched uranium back in 1946. They actually called it Operation Dog, but they didn't store it but about a year. And then later, the building was used for other purposes. Finally, in the 60s, a department head from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory was using it, and his secretary was named Katie. And she would come out there for lunch and fix a lunch for the crew, and they would eat on picnic tables out in the woods. It was just a really nice place. And it got the nickname of Katie's Kitchen, and that's stuck. It had. So I'm sorry, I've taken us off on two different tracks. Not what I intended to do, Don. So let's come back to
Ray. I want to interrupt here for just a second. While we're talking about underground, I know there were a number of storm shelters that were put in Oak Ridge. Don, did you know anybody who had one of those?
Yes, I've got a story. Matter of fact, I've got a story about that. I was a Boy Scout, and matter of fact, I was an Eagle Scout, but I was in another troop before this, and it was held up at the chapel on the hill, and we had our meetings in a storm shelter way down it was added on to chapel on the hill sometime, but we went down these stairs, and it was kind of like almost a dungeon type place in there. Still, I guess it still exists because it had the sign on there, storm shelter, in case there was a war, that's where you'd go, and they had stuff in there. But it was dug deep down into basement, and we had our scout meetings 129 in that storm shelter down there. It wasn't a storm shelter, I get the fallout shelter.
Fallout shelter.
Right. Oh, me.
There he is. He's back.
Don, there you go. You come back.
I
You're
got
good.
a phone call and I had
Oh,
to hit it real quick, turn it off. Yeah.
it's okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Oh. So there, and again, there were several people had them. Some of them had them in their houses,
Mm-hmm.
and not too long ago, they had a false alarm in Hawaii about a rocket coming in, missile coming in. So the television station over in Knoxville called me and said, "Ray, what would happen if Oak Ridge got that kind of information that a rocket was coming in or a missile? Can we come over and talk to you about that?" And I said, "Sure, come on over." So when they got here, they set up their camera. And when they got started, they said, "Ray, what would you do if something like what happened in Hawaii happened here in Oak Ridge, that a missile was headed toward Oak Ridge?" I said, "Well, Oak Ridge has been a target all during the Cold War. If we got that kind of notice, I'd just kiss this whole world goodbye, because I'm going to be vaporized in about a few minutes." Obviously, they didn't use that segment on camera. They wanted to talk about fallout shelters, so we did. We talked about them some. And I've been in a few. I guess you have too. In addition to that one where you had your scout meetings,
I
that
had,
other
yeah.
home here have several of them. But we
Hey,
don't think about that now much anymore.
no, I'll tell you something, Ray, that was very interesting that I did.
Right.
Me and my lady friend did 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It was strange on the school system how that they arranged where you went to school. I lived on Malvern Road, and it was on the left side of Michigan Avenue, all the way up to the top. On the right side went to Cedar Hill. One street
Yeah.
up from me on Maple Lane went to Cedar Hill. From Malvern Road back to Magnolia off of Michigan, which takes in about 5 streets, we walked through the woods and went to Pine Valley, which the school administration built. Well,
Yeah.
we had a path that I rode down and rode my Swin Stingray bike down there. And during the summer, they had that was another thing. During the summer, really had the coaches had every playground going for the kids, But I rode my bicycle down that path for years, and people, Mr. Self and a bunch of people that lived in that corner, it was a place that the kids from the 40s up to probably, they closed Pine Valley as a school in '68, I believe I'm correct on that. And so it became not a path. I mean, as it grows over. So the other day I said, hadn't been down from Cedar Hill all the way down to Pine Valley, I guess, in 40 years. So we took that hike down, went by a place called Tadpole Pond. And so I told, well, as you get back down to Pine Valley, I said, I know that's not a path, but let's try to take it up through there. So we walked up through there, and it's grown up. It's not a path, but you can still see where it was, kind of. And I stood beside the tree that I used to jump the root with my bicycle. And I know to many people that may not seem like I sat there and stood there and took my picture and thought about all those times riding my bicycle down there and how that made me feel, because that is a typical thing that an Oak Ridger would think about, because life is very fast. I close my eyes and I'm still a kid again doing that. And seeing my brother would beat me down there during the summer. And, when you're young, you're 8, 10 years old, you feel so good all the time. You just go from morning to night. You go in and eat your supper and your mother calls to come in and eat, and you run back out again. And the neighbors, I have to switch around a little bit, because here's something I guess that people don't realize too. Most of the moms stayed home, and they would gather us all up in a station wagon. It may be in the evening, and just drive around and pick us up and take us down to the Dairy Queen or Clinton Highway to get ice cream. And the mothers looked out for you. You just picked, I remember just going in. I didn't even have to knock. We just went in their house, and my little girlfriend Jennifer, is she here? Or Miriam and Woody Cook, they called them Miss Purple because everything was purple in their house, from the glass to their car they had. Well, and that was, people don't realize just how close knit the streets were. The mothers watched out for the other kids. The daddies, if you did something wrong, they'd tell your dad, say, Don's done this, or if I did, I tried to be a good kid. But sometimes as kids we get mischief, a little bit, but we'd play in the evening. We'd play on high go seat and play in the street. We wouldn't go in the summertime till it got dark, and I don't know if you can really grasp how close knit the people were, Ray, but it was just where my neighbors where I live on Panama here. I know a few of them, but you don't really, they don't interact. You don't have as many kids, but it's changed in that respect some,
Don, you and I are close to the same age, and I grew up in Kingston, and I lived in a little subdivision back in behind Cherokee School. There used to be Cherokee Elementary where I went to school. Now it's a middle school. But it was a half a dozen or 8 or so streets in this little subdivision. And our street wasn't incredibly long. We probably had 25 houses, something like that on it.
Right.
I remember when I was growing up that there were 100 kids that lived on that street that were under the age of 18.
Exactly.
Just on that street. And it was the same way with us. All the moms knew all the kids, and they didn't mind momming some of those kids that weren't their own if they needed it. So
they're right.
Or they treat them just like their kids. You're right. You just walk into the house. You wouldn't even have to.
They did what I call loving discipline.
Yeah.
They wanted you to know if they correct you. They didn't do anything bad or anything, but they might take you to the side and say, "No, Don, you shouldn't do that," or whatever I was doing. Like I said, I didn't get any trouble or anything much, but it's just it's a great, just a great feeling. And the thing that I've got here, I might pull it up here and show it. When I did my cover on my book, Clifford Smith did, I thought of how I was going to do it, and I had myself drawn he drew me on my bicycle. And it kind of has me going to all the places that I went to as a kid. I'm going to kind of hold that up. I don't know if we can see that or not. But
yeah, we can see it. That's good.
But the thing about it is, Ray, it's like sometimes I go up to Blankenship Field, like I was there. I walk up there and I walk down in Elm Grove and places. And sometimes I close my eyes or I go to the practice field at Blankenship down at the high school and visualize still being a young person. It's never left me, and I hope it never does. I always say I want to keep a little bit of the kid always in me, because it was just unbelievably special. It almost had come to a point where you can't even describe what it was like unless you lived it, And
I think you're right. Mm-hmm. I do. I think if you go ahead.
I remember Coach Martin, I wrote in there, and I was just a little tight. It was probably about the time we moved back up on Michigan Avenue. And back then, of course, your dad and mother, they'd let you walk to the ball game. Nobody bothered you. Just walked through the path and you walked up there and walked. And I remember Coach Martin, I was standing there by the stairs that go up there. And back then there was an old press box that was part of the school. And Coach Martin reached up to me, and he was such a nice man. He kneeled down and he said, patted me on he said, "You're going to be a Wildcat someday, boy," like that, And I ended up, I was too little, but I was the manager for the football team. And I do have a funny story, and Emery Hale was here yesterday, our former coach. He came into town I was telling him a real funny story about that I was the manager back in my junior year, and we had a boy named Bobby Winkle, went on to play at Kentucky and played for the Jets for a little while. Well, he was a man. I mean, he was 6-something in weight. I mean, he's huge. And he got hurt at practice one day, and Coach told me, he said, Don, you're going to have to take him up to Doc Tittle's office, orthopedic surgeon. I said, well, Coach, I got a little Corvair. He won't fit in my car. He said, oh, you can get him in there. So here we go up there, and he's hanging his whole body out the window, taking him up there. He wouldn't fit in my car. I thought that was funny. I never have forgot that,
But you got him to the doctor, huh?
I got him up there, but I mean, it wasn't just his head sticking out; his whole body was sticking there. His daddy was plant manager at Oak Ridge and had come from Paducah, plant manager. I'm sure you're familiar with Mr. Winkle.
Yeah, there's lots of stories about him.
Yeah, he was. I didn't know him; I just knew the son. But he came his junior year, and I got another funny story that Coach Hale told about it. And back then we had Davis Brothers Cafeteria downtown, and Coach Hale said, Don, I wasn't making a lot of money just as a coach and a teacher, that we didn't pay that much. He said, I had two little girls to raise, and said, Bobby come in that summer and said, I, of course, got him, took him, I want to take him, get him a meal. And so we went to Davis Brothers, and Bobby was so big, said, he kept putting stuff on his ordering stuff as he went through the line. And he said, as he was putting stuff on his tray, I started taking stuff off my tray.
He must have been a big boy, because I interviewed his dad, Bob, years ago. And I remember Bob Senior, I guess, he was a big man. I mean, he was a big man himself. So,
well, hey Keith, I'm gonna tell you something. Bobby Winkle, I've got a picture of the whole team, and we had some big boys, but I was just a little, when I graduated high school, I probably didn't weigh 125, 30 pounds. Now I was probably not even as tall as I never matured. I got to probably 30 years old, but Bobby was, he was probably somewhere around 6'8", probably weighing about 260 pounds. I mean, he was just huge, muscle too, big boy.
Yeah.
But a real nice guy too. He was a real nice fella, And that's another thing. You don't forget your people. I try to tell the young people this. I said, when you go to school those 3 years, it was 3 years when I went to high school, it's 4 now. I said, those years, you might not even realize it, but all the people you went to junior high, some elementary and high school, when you leave that school, you're not going to see a lot of those people. They're going to move off, and you may never see them till you come back to a reunion. You enjoy those years, and you take it in, because there'll never be years like that again, as we know.
That's true.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. And the older we get, the more we realize those years are fond memories that have a lot of meaning to us. Absolutely.
I got a couple things I want to mention that people may not know about me. That Ray, you might not know it, and Keith, you might not know it. My granddaddy come here in 1944 and started working at the powerhouse at K25, and my dad came in 53 later on. But they were from northern Mississippi in the Corinth, Mississippi area, right on the Tennessee-Mississippi line, McNairy County, Tennessee, and Alcorn County, Mississippi. Well, the lady that was killed in the movie Walking Tall, her real name was Louise Hathcock. Well, that was my mother's great aunt, and she was killed at the Shamrock Motel on Highway 45. That's why they called it the Lucky Spot. And that's one thing. That was my mother's aunt by marriage and my great aunt. And then Carlos Hathcock, which had a book called One Shot, One Killed. He's the most well-known Marine sniper in American history. He is known throughout if you read about him, and he would be my great uncle. He was out of, a lot of them came to northern Mississippi, but they were out of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. The Hathcock is my mother's side, and my Bell is my dad's side. But that's just a little side note about it. So I'm kind of glad I didn't grow up in Corinth because I might have been in a little trouble if I stayed down there. Growing up as a kid down there, it's quite different down there than it is here, you know.
You know, it's funny, Don and Ray, and I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Ray, but you know how family can have, you know, connections to Oak Ridge. You know, of course, I didn't grow up in Oak Ridge. I grew up in Kingston, which is, you know, 15 miles away, but I did grow up in Oak Ridge. Every Friday night, you know, there were 4 of us kids, and if we wanted to go someplace, Mom and Dad would throw us all in the Impala and come to the big city of Oak Ridge, you know, on a Friday night. So I spent lots of times, you know, sniff around in front of the Federal Bakery, you know, in the shopping center and smelling that good food. But a story that I was told that my mother told me, my mother and father both grew up in Inglewood, and that's a story in itself. They grew up across the street from each other. But my mother's father was a lineman, was an electrician. And when they were building Oak Ridge, he came up to work on the project, building the buildings and putting the, you know, all the new buildings in construction, things such as that. And Mom said that she remembers one day he came back home and looked like he was terrified. I mean, absolutely terrified. And he stayed at home for 3 days before he came back. And she finally found out later that a fellow that he was working with was electrocuted and killed on the project when they were building, and it just scared him to death. And but yeah, he was my grandfather. He was one of the construction workers that came in to help build Oak Ridge, like so many other people. So
you know that was an experience that I mean, Don's talked to us about the great experience he had growing up in Oak Ridge, but building Oak Ridge was a tremendous undertaking. Mm-hmm. And actually, there were several deaths. Electrocution was some of the causes. Others were construction accidents, being run over by heavy equipment, falling. In fact, I did a little research to find out the number of deaths that happened. You know, the same thing happened up at Norris Dam.
Yeah.
All of these large construction projects back in that time were done without some of the safety protections that we have on construction today. So
Ray,
getting someone electrocuted that would have been something that would have happened, but to have it happen close to you would have a huge effect on you. Yeah, Don.
Right. Yes, I've got a story about that. My father told me when he was out at K-25, and you're probably familiar with this, but we'll mention it. My dad was out there in 53 up to probably 10 years, but he said that they had these trichloroethylene pits where they would dip and hoist big giant parts down into the pit to be cleaned and bring them back up. Well, they got ready to clean it, and the vapors down in the bottom, they're heavier, the vapors. And a man went down there too early to clean it, and then he was overcome, and then the other guy went down there to try to save him, and they both passed away. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, Ray.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those kind of hazards were there, and people worked around them, and oftentimes didn't realize the hazard of what they were working with until it was too late. Just like those vapors down in that pit, that we wouldn't go into a place like that today until it had been checked to be sure that all those vapors were.
Don,
you know, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
No, yeah. I wanted to kind of change things a little bit, talk about you growing up. One of the things when I've talked to people and interviewed people before that grew up in Oak Ridge, and you know, one of the things I asked about was you were a teenager in the 60s and the 70s, late 60s and early 70s. What was Oak Ridge like then? Because there was a lot of cultural activity throughout the nation. You know, you had the Vietnam War, you had you know, assassinations, you know, you had you know, those kinds of things. What was Oak Ridge protected by that pretty much, or were there protests and things such as that?
I can't remember any protests as far as that, but we had some racial problems in the early '60s during the Martin Luther King time in Jefferson. There were some racial problems at the New Jefferson, and I can remember some of the parents took their kids out of Oak Ridge schools for a short period of time and sent them to Webb or to a private school or to maybe even a Catholic school. But I never had any problem. Integrated in the schools in my 6th grade or 5th grade year. I can't remember exactly at Pine Valley. So I never do any difference. I had never had any problems. I mean, matter of fact, I got along well, and it was just a thing that really never had any problem with that. It was just the thing that it was, honestly, it was accepted pretty well. And, I'd always been taught and brought up that we treat somebody, no matter the skin color or who they are, we look at the character of them, not the color of their skin. And I was really brought up that way. I was taught that, until somebody does something to you, you treat them with respect, and I always did. I will tell a story about that. I went in 1977 to work in the Paducah Gas and Diffusion Plant on an entry-level job, and my boss was an older black man named Mr. Thomas, a gentleman, fine man, and I worked with a guy, educated black guy that was graduated from Murray State University. Well, they took to me really heavy. I used to sweep out the process building. Well, next thing I know, they really liked me and put me on a van, and I was delivering the men to the building and doing errands during the day. And that was a job that normally would have took years to get. Well, to make a long story short, I didn't know this. I just got along well with them. I enjoyed working with everybody, and was very homesick at that. I wanted to be in Oak Ridge, really. But they said that they had never met a young man like me. Said, I don't know what the difference in you was, Don, but you came across as, they used the term regular. You were real, and you were raised different than some of maybe the white kids were raised in Paducah at that time. Maybe it was different as far as it was typically a different type town,
Mm-hmm.
But they sensed in me, and matter of fact, this made me feel very good. I wrote an article about it when I would call back, and Mr. Thomas is actually still living today up in his 90s. He said they would always, 2 or 3 years may go by, and they say, I wonder how old Bell's doing. Said we never met one like him. Said they're doing something right in Oak Ridge. Said they're doing something right in Oak Ridge. Said it just, and I felt that made me feel proud, because I think it made me feel proud that my father instilled in me to treat people and my fellow man. Don't try to be something that you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Be who you are. I don't want to, like I said, everybody can do different things, and we need each other. And that's if I do a writing of some kind, it comes from the heart. I write mostly about things in Oak Ridge, or I talk about things in the city, not so much in the technical end, because I wasn't privy to it as much. That wasn't my thing. And we didn't even talk much about what our dads did. It wasn't even hardly my dad was a general foreman and department head over dimensional inspection at Y-12, and was very successful at it.
I'm sorry, I interviewed, speaking of that, not talking about what your dads did. I think as Gordon Fee told the story, he said that that his son was in high school before he realized his dad wasn't a train engineer.
Right.
He was an engineer, but he thought he was a train engineer.
So yeah, we really did not. If your dad is, if he was a maintenance mechanic, or if he worked in the, whatever his position was, or if your dad worked for the schools, or he was whatever he did, as a bunch of kids, I went to school with the Bigelow kids. There was Dr. Bigelow. I went to school with Martha Evans, which George Evans was pretty high out at Y12. I went to school with, what was the other one that was Martha Wilcox. I went to school with her at Pine Valley. But none of us made any difference. And we might have known that their dad had maybe a high position or something, but it was never even discussed. We were a real team of people. We didn't care what our father. We just cared that we were enjoying growing up and having so much to do and places to go and things to do. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you had your tennis courts, you had your horseshoes. You see your dad. I walked in one day down there, and they had the square dancers in the choral room with them, and I knew Mr. Stansberry and a bunch of them, and they'd have their little badges on, and they'd be dressed up. And I thought it was a little bit, I was into monkeys and beetles and all that stuff, and I thought it was a little bit as a kid, but I could see that they were having a great time, and I thought that was kind of neat that would be on a Saturday night, and it is so much. There was just so much to do here, and like I say, I could just sit here. I worked through the Skyway Drive-In all through high school. You had your batting cages down there. You had your fun land rides downtown. You had about 6 counters downtown. You had your Cole's counter you could go eat at, which was later on it turned into I think it was Revco, and then you had Woolworth, you had Walgreens, you had McCroy's counter, and that was just downtown. Woodland had a counter, Grove Center had a counter, you had a counter at Elm Grove had one, Mr. McGinley. You had, of course, Service Drug and Jack. They were everywhere. I mean, it was just like Jefferson. I left that out. I wanted Jefferson. Mm-hmm. It was just unbelievable the things to do here. Mm-hmm. And ball teams during the summer. We've had softball teams, and in the summer we played each other. All elementary schools would play each other. At the end of the year, we had a playground circus that we performed a skit at each time we went. It was where the Civic Center which is had Midtown Ballpark 1 and 2 right there. And it was just a great experience. I was a kid, and I was called, James Bond was popular at that time, and I was James Bum 007 and a half. That was my, and another thing in Pine Valley on field day, we had the national Frisbee champion from Oak Ridge, Danny Sanders. Well, in elementary school, he went to elementary school with me, and I think he transferred to another one. I never won any. I was not very athletic, really, honestly. I was just so little, but I did win the Frisbee throw at Pine Valley on field day. Still got the certificate. I threw that Frisbee, and it caught a pocket of wind, and it carried it all the way down. I said, that's the only thing I ever won like that, So it's just something that matter of fact, I told my lady friend, that's where I threw that Frisbee right there when I went down to Pine Valley.
That's the time that you just stop and say, okay, I'm done. That's my legacy. I'm done with athletics. That's what I'm going to be known for.
Then I got into high school, and I was a football manager, and Coach Pope or somebody, or they put about 4 ping pong tables up at the top of the old gym. And I got into it real heavy and got really good. I mean, I was playing my last period with Jim, and I'd stay to 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and my dad I'd walk home. And my dad said, "What is going on, Donnie? You don't ever stay after school." And I said, "Daddy, I'm into this ping pong tape, ping pong." I said, "I want to get one of those foam paddles." I said, "I'm really doing good at it." I said, "I'm playing 3 or 4 hours." He bought me one where I'd practice at night. And so everybody asked, "Well, what did you major in high school?" And I said, "I majored in ping pong."
There you go. There you go.
Oh, me. But Don, those are tremendous stories, and you're right. Oak Ridge was unique, and I think a special place. Still is, but especially for people growing up here, they have some memories that are just really fond. And you shared some with us today that are typical of a kid growing up in a unique and special place in a special time here in Oak Ridge.
You know, right?
Thank you.
Well, one thing I would like to say is
Yeah.
it's kind of strange at this point. At church, when Emory Hill talked Thursday night, had a gentleman that graduated in '56 called me over and told me just how much that my articles are meaning and that he really enjoyed them. Then last night I was up at the sitting on permanent bleachers up there, and a guy called me over and he said, I graduated a little after you did. He said, I want to tell you something. He said, I want you to continue to write the articles. He said, you're really making a difference. And you, in this pandemic, you brought it back to me. And I said, well, that's what I try to do. And I said, I want to thank one person, because when I was elected to school board, I wrote 5 or 6 years ago, or 10 years ago, I wrote quite a bit. Well, when I got elected to the school board, I kind of quit. It's kind of like I said, well, I know I can do it. It's not something that, I did take some courses in creative writing in high school and stuff. I never really did anything with it. But the person that's responsible for me to writing the last year is a gentleman that graduated Oak Ridge in 1968. He walked up to me as I was walking at Elm Grove last year, and he said, Don said, I noticed you're not writing anymore. And I said, well, Mike, I kind of did that, and I proved to myself I could. I'm not trying to do, but I said, I'm on the school board and got a lot of time dealing with it, and so doing some TV shows for Channel 95. And I said, I just don't. He said, I would give anything if you'd start writing. So he is responsible for me writing the last seven or eight articles, and
Well,
the one
good.
house. So I appreciate him saying that.
Yeah,
I appreciate.
glad
I don't do it, Ray, as you know. I try to tell people this. I'm not doing it for me or any. I want people to get something out of it. That's what makes me happy, when they get something out of it.
Well, I'm glad he spoke to you, because your writing is important and you need to keep it up. You ought to put another book together at some point and publish that. But anything you do that will capture the history of Oak Ridge is surely appreciated, not by just the people who talk to you. You've got to know that if one or two people say that to you, probably 10 others feel the same way and just hadn't been able to say it to you.
I'll have
Keep it
to
up,
say
buddy.
before we wrap up, Ray, I appreciate being on here today and with y'all, and y'all are special people. But I give all the credit that I do to the Lord Jesus Christ. He's the one that is in control. He's the one that helps us do everything. So I have to say that as a Christian man.
All right. Well, thank you, Don. We really appreciate you being on. And Ray, why don't you tell us who do we have lined up next time?
We've got a friend of ours that we've talked to, David Hackett, who's going to spend some time with us talking about pre-Oak Ridge, and we'll even get him to talk about pre-white settlement. I know he'll tell us about the Yuchi Indians that were here, but he also can tell us about the prehistory of the entire area. I mean, he understands the layers of the rocks and all of the things that we just kind of glance at and think about. Yep. He knows it and understands it. So David Hackett will be with us talking about prehistory in this area.
Sounds good. All right, folks, thanks for watching today, and we'll see you again next time.